Hi, Stuart here. Today we're going to talk about culture for developers and developer-like things, including architects, QAs, tech folks. So, really, culture starts at the top. It starts from leadership, and bad leadership makes bad culture. But that doesn't mean that around you, the culture has to be as bad. In other words, you can have an impact on the culture in your area of influence. And, part of realizations about culture after almost 40 years of being in technology is I keep meeting some of the same people over and over again. And part of that is just that I haven't really changed milieus in terms of my area of computer science. I've always sort of been a guy that works on first embedded systems and then big complicated enterprise systems. And then, now I do a lot of cloud. And so that tends to be, attracts the people who like to do that. And so I keep meeting them over and over again. But what's important about that is if you can even make a small culture change where you are, people will remember that. And if you're smart about networking, and I am, as many of you know, not a big fan of social media. I'm not opposed. I'm just saying I don't do it other than LinkedIn and YouTube. YouTube because this is where the venue is for doing decks like this, and LinkedIn because it's my professional life, right? I'm very careful to curate my LinkedIn presence to be my professional person. And, but the thing is that people remember the truly good and the horribly bad, and they tend to forget the things in the middle. And there's a saying that character is destiny. It's often miscategorized to ascribe to very different cultures. But in fact, it and the idea of karma, what you put out into the universe is what comes back to you, is by and large proven to be true, at least in my experience. So I tried to sit down and think of 7 rules of culture, because 7 is, Miller's number. It's a nice round thing. And I wanted to encapsulate in this deck some real world, real life things that I could pass on to you that have helped me. And if they can help you, then so much the better. So a lot of us learned the golden rule really early on in our careers. In fact, I learned the golden rule in preschool, and my mother was a big proponent of the golden rule. And in fact, in several houses we lived in, we had the golden rule hanging up as a picture in the hallway. And it had, religious icons associated with it. But essentially, you can boil down all of the good things about being a good human being into one rule. And it's this one. And the golden rule is really hard to do. That's the thing. Just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. So getting into the habit of thinking before speaking, which I am particularly bad at, as I tend to say what I am thinking unfiltered, part of being neuroatypical, I suspect, and part of just being me. But you can develop delaying tactics by cleaning your glasses or saying, or doing something else to do a little pre-editing in what you're going to say, especially if what someone has just said to you is a conflicting sort of an output, right? And you make your brain go, wait, and then you feel like you want to say something. The other thing is just the maturity of being able to go, let me think about that. And you don't have to respond to everything, and you don't have to respond right now. And there's an old saying, pick your battles. And I believe in it. I'm not always personally good at it, but I believe in it. And so, sometimes you just got to let some stuff go, because if you're one of those people like me that tends to be very, how shall I say this politely, focused on everything, then it's really easy to want to fight every fight. And sometimes the strategy is to not do that. We talked about that before in other videos. But sometimes letting people cool down and then coming back to it is a good idea. And of course, in previous videos, I've talked about, don't communicate when you're agitated. And then Hanlon's razor just came back to my attention. I think I've always known about it, but you said it the other day, and it really stuck in my mind, which is never an attribute to malice, that which is adequately explained by stupidity. And so, going back to the thing of you don't have to respond to everything right in the moment, it's good. And people don't always articulate what they want to say in the way they want to say it. And so starting from a place of being charitable, taking what they said in the best possible context. Now, obviously, if they say something very derogatory about you, it's hard to get that into context. But in terms of your professional life, of an idea like, let's divide by 0, that'll be fun. You can be a little more measured, and then just applying the golden rule before you say something is a good kind of rule of thumb. And going along with that, particularly as you ascend in rank, it's really hard to do that and not also have either a direct management responsibility or an implied management responsibility. So let's say you're an architect, and in the org chart, you have no headcount, right? You're a box off of the team lead. But what you say and what you do is going to hugely impact the people around you. I mean, if it doesn't, you're not doing very much architecture. So the way in which you do that is equally as important to what you do. And so there is, I think, a well-attributed statement from one of the founders of the Toyota method, which is a deeply respected methodology, which is fix the problem, not the blame. So always make the first stop in your journey of correctness to fix the problem and not the blame, and then come back to, if there's a root cause analysis where a human messed up, you can get to that. But right now, we have a problem in front of us. Let's fix it. Make things teachable moments. Like, all right, let's talk about the pros and cons of this. And that's maybe do a little code sample. Let's do, let's show using our various tools why that's a good thing or a bad thing or what the trade-offs is. And in engineering, most things are trade-offs. And very few things are utterly pointless. Dividing by 0 is high in my list of things I have not found a good use for. I'm not saying there isn't one, I just haven't found it yet. And that attitude of, I haven't found a good use for that yet, is a healthy outlook in a way of expressing that thought to others to make them try to think that way too. It's sometimes known as the RFC way of thinking, prefer and avoid as guidance. And trying to avoid always and never, and saying and being very focused on use cases. And so part of that is, let's say you're doing a peer review of some code, you've got a pull request in front of you, and you are looking at the code, try to give a what some people would say is bloodless, but I think more properly it's considered to be professional, and saying, for this particular use case, I don't believe this particular code construction is your best choice. You might be better off with blah, 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 and here is why, right? That's a good way to do a PR that won't embarrass people and turns things into a teachable moment, et cetera, et cetera. And if you are in a position of leadership where people report to you, this rule of commending in public and correcting in private is really important. But I'll give you an asterisk, because when I first started out, I only worked with North Americans who tend to be culturally very direct. Americans are considered brash by the rest of the world. We're not community focused, we're more self-focused. I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying it's a cultural difference. As I've had to work with people around the world, I've gotten an opportunity to learn what does and doesn't work in their culture. And so it's important to understand that not everyone is culturally headspaced to accept directed personal commendation. They're typically willing to accept public criticism, although you should avoid that if you can. But if you say, so-and-so did this awesome thing, let's look at it, they may be very embarrassed, and they may have it may stress them out. So the way you deal with that is, the team did something really, really cool today. Let's look at it and let's see if we can learn some lessons from this. And then the person will know that it's their work you're looking at without you saying in person. And then you take the time to, out of band in a one-on-one situation, say, listen, I hope you don't mind that I showed them this piece of thing that you did. I think it is quite clever, and I thought the group would benefit from seeing it, and I wanted to thank you for contributing to it. And that's typically a way that culturally they'll be happy with. So the other thing is that new managers tend to be too effusive about praise. I have been criticized in the past for being very withholding of praise. And my problem is that I always look for the truly exceptional, something I could not have done myself before I praise something. But there is a saying one of my old bosses had. He was a senior thought leader and executive. I followed him to 3 different companies, believe it or not. Because he was such a good executive, and knew, when to give detail, when to withhold detail, when to let you decide things yourself. He was forgiving of mistakes as long as they weren't too, dreadful. And so he said, sometimes all it takes to be exceptional is to be consistently average. That there's value in a team member who just consistently produces business value at a steady rate. And those people are absolutely deserving of your praise. Agreed, they're low maintenance, so you tend to forget about them, but you shouldn't. Right? You should say, not for nothing, but, you were really a pillar of strength for the team during this last sprint. I don't think we could have done as well in the release as we did. You were very dedicated. I never have to really think about your quality. You're really a steady warrior of code. And I just wanted to take a moment to say personally that I'm grateful. And depending on who they are, they may or may not want you to allude to that in public. But it is good to point out the people who are just steadily productive. And they're typically also ones that are very quiet, and they're not praise seeking. And sadly, many of them don't do much to curate their own career. One thing I made a mistake on really early on in my career is I nominated somebody for a promotion that gave them a lot more responsibility and supervision without talking to them first and seeing if that's something they actually wanted. They absolutely did not want that. So be aware that while you should be an advocate for your team members and their career growth, always ask them first what they want, so you don't accidentally put in a promotion for someone who doesn't want one, who's perfectly happy, being that pillar of productivity, and they are in their role, and their role is perfect for where they are in their life's journey, and they don't want anything else. They don't want less, they don't want more, they're right there. And then lastly, set an example by being incredibly forgiving about criticism directed at yourself. A good leader is the first person to raise their hand and say, I think I steered the team down a wrong path. And if someone wants to take issue with that and they're less than polite about it, I tend to be very forgiving than I used to be. And I think that's a good thing. try for consensus. Good leaders really try for consensus, which is to say, there's a difference between consensus and groupthink. Groupthink is the people with strong personalities say we're going to do A, and everybody else goes, all right, I'm afraid of those people, I'm going to do A. A really good leader can make consensus by saying, well, A sounds good, but what are the alternatives? What are our use cases? And what are the pros and cons? And that allows the people who may not be as strong a personality to point out something really important, like, well, that results in dividing by zero and the end of the universe and all matter, time, and space as we know it. And you go, wow, that's a really important consequence of A. Let's consider alternatives to A. And then, we try to come to consensus. And if we can't, that's why bake-offs are good, right? POCs are good. If your org says there's no time to do proof of concepts or little tests, things that are less than a week, a couple of people getting together and trying out different things to see which one works best for your use case, beware, that is a bad place you're working in. If you have to be the person who guesses right the first time, all the time, nobody can do that, right? You have to let other voices speak just because they may have thought of something you didn't, and you have to have time to be wrong. And a poison culture will never let you be wrong. They will be very Red Queenie about it, or they will just say, well, you're the technologist, you should know better. You should always know what the right answer is. There's always going to be a right answer, and you should know what it is. Well, engineers know that there's no such thing as a right answer. There is a set of right answers, each of which has pros and cons. And you have to figure out, based on use cases that you have now and are likely to have in the near future, which one is which. But you also have to be willing to then, do something else. And that's why patterns like, facades and things like that are really important in our work, because they allow us to switch out the engine later for something that might be different or new or more efficient, or maybe adapt to a new set of use cases without breaking the world, right? So interface-driven design and development. And, we've talked about it before. You have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to try something and see what happens. And it's important that if you want to build a good culture, that you have to be the person in the room that raises their hand and says, okay, we think this is the right thing to do. We're going to give it a try. We could be wrong. How would we know if we were wrong? And then what are our alternatives? And set that expectation before you begin, especially to the powers that be, right? And if you don't have a culture of experimentation, correction, and innovation in the larger org, have one around you, right? Build one around you. Hold yourself accountable. Lead from the front, as they say in OCS. Particularly some of the most successful armies in the world that have relatively small numbers, like the British Army, the U.S. Marines, and so on. The leaders aren't, behind the ranks. They're in front of them. And, if you have shop standards, if you have processes, if you have rules, you need to be seen above and beyond everyone else to be following them. And if you mess that up, then you have to say, oops, I should have done X, Y, Z, bad me. Let me work on getting that, squared away. And then say why you think that thing had value. Like, most of the time this thing's not going to matter, but there's these use cases where if we follow this process, then we have a way of doing a remediation, or we have a way of fixing this. And so I probably should have followed the process, and I didn't, and I'm going to fix that. So, and if you're in any kind of leadership position, whether you have assigned subordinates or not, step up and stand in front of them, right? You're in a meeting and your team's getting kind of beat up, and say, look, leave my team alone. this is on me. I was a key participant in the decision, if indeed you were. And, we tried this, it didn't work, or we tried this and this thing went wrong that we didn't foresee. We're going to work on remediating that and trying to prevent that from happening in the future, but it's on me. And we can talk about how I messed up, or we can talk about how we're going to go forward. And for now, I think talking about how to go forward is the thing. In other words, always show honesty, accountability, and transparency. You'll make people around you more comfortable. They will feel better. They will know that you're in the fight with them. And that will lead to people feeling better, even in an organization that has dysfunction. So the other way to do that is to do confidence building, right? So the way you build confidence is you build skills and practices. Centers of excellence, sometimes they're called, if you're in one of those orgs. Nothing wrong with that phrase, but the fundamental idea is things are teachable moments. As new people come on board, take time to mentor them. As you have junior people on the project, take time to teach them things. Your investment in showing people how to do something they did not know how to do before will pay off in them being more productive and you not having to do it. So out of pure selfishness, right, it's in your own best interest to teach politely, to show them, to enable them, to empower them to do things. And then when things go wrong, figure out, okay, well, we did it this way and it didn't work the way we wanted. We're going to make a note on what happened. If this happens, then here's what you do. And I'm a big believer in wikis. I'm a big believer in encouraging the team to actually go look in the wiki first. And if they find a gap and then there's a discussion, fill the gap. Right? Update the wiki page, add a new wiki page. Some wiki engines are terrible. Some of them are awesome sauce, and some of them are somewhere in the middle. But you can always make a wiki better if you can attach an outside search engine to it, and you write wiki pages using the RFC syntax, and you put keywords in the titles and descriptions, and lots of other good wiki things. I'm sure there's lots of excellent videos about how to write good content that's searchable out on YouTube. I defer it to somebody else, but let me just say that the heart of building skills and practices is to freaking write them down and then demo them. Have 1 hour every week where the team comes together and you collectively learn something new, or you take something you already know how to do and you learn to do it better. Tricks and tips in Visual Studio for productivity. How to use the profiler in Visual Studio, 5 tips to make your MS tests better, whatever, right? Have a reoccurring skills and practices meeting, 10 optimization mistakes not to make in SQL Server, right? And teach that. And make sure that anybody who can and wants to present, that knows something or has taken the time to learn something, builds their skills and confidence by sharing it with others. It's a good way of helping them do personal career development and empowering them to feel good, because then people say, wow, I did not know that. That was very cool. Thanks. And that just goes a long way. So it's hard to work with other humans. If you're neuroatypical, it's even harder to work with humans. And you have to separate, if you're going to be a professional, a person's professional capabilities, like are they a good QA, although they grate on you, on your nerves considerably, but they're detail-oriented, they write fantastic bugs with plentiful details and reproductions. You don't like them, but you admire their professionalism. You must learn to separate those two things. And when you're at work, to the extent that you could ignore their behavioral quirks, and focus on the things they do well, then you'll be better off. And in a lot of organizations, you're going to ask to peer review people. And it's important when you do that, although you do need to consider soft skills in the area of evaluation, you also need to make sure that you are fairly attributing their strengths. So don't undersell them, don't oversell them. And again, using sort of the RFC standard, I prefer it when they write these awesomely detailed bugs with reproductions and they give suggestions as to where we could look to remediate the issue. I wish they would avoid being hypercritical during the bug reviews, as that doesn't necessarily contribute to a solution, right? That, just be fair. And then just a word of professional warning. I don't care what your boss says or your boss's boss. An invitation to be brutally candid about them or one of their peers is an invitation for you to commit career suicide. So, the way to say that they're not paying attention is to say, given their busy portfolio, there are times when, had they had more time to focus on our program, we would have gotten guidance, more clear guidance earlier is the way to say that. And there are lots of courses on the interweb, and there are lots of good books. I recommended The 1 Minute Manager. I've recommended Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People and Machiavelli's The Prince before. If you go read those and you learn how to wordsmith, you can damn with faint praise, as Shakespeare said, without committing career suicide in the process. And you always, notice the trick there is to always attribute the burden of their other duties from being able to fully embrace what your project or team or person needed. They will look you in the eye and swear that they really want your honest opinion. No, they don't. And you just don't want to risk it. At the end of the day, you've got to take care of you, which brings us to, for your own sanity, don't stay in a poison pond. Like, knowing a situation is hopeless, but don't rage quit. I am appalled over the last year to 2 years when I see perfectly capable technical people leaving their job without a job to go to and quitting with no notice, no transition, no handover, no knowledge transfer. It's just not acceptable professionally, right? You can rage quit Halo if you want, but don't rage quit your job, right? Give decent notice, 2 weeks. And if you know you're going to be looking around, start documenting what you do so that you have a program to do knowledge transfer from. If you leave a place on good terms and just say, well, I think I've gotten a lot of value from working here, and I've identified this other thing, which I think could be really great building my career. I've obviously arranged for knowledge transfer. The higher ranking you are, the more important it is. And I hope that you'll wish me luck in my new endeavor, and I have every good intention that you and the team will thrive, with the new person that comes in. And if you find that, there's nowhere for you to go to, that says something about you that you probably ought to have some introspection about. Senior staff will healthily have 1 or 2 job inquiries a week on LinkedIn and potentially other places depending on where you are. Again, my professional life is on LinkedIn, and my avocation is on YouTube, right? Making videos for all of you that I hope you'll enjoy. And then, the great thing I like about LinkedIn is if I've worked with somebody and they reach out to me and they say, hey, there was kind of a layoff where I was and I'm kind of in a tough spot. Would you mind, writing something about me? And I always do. I always, again, using the guidance on the last slide, I always try to think of all the positive things I can think to say about them. And if that contributes them to getting a situation, then I'm very pleased, because I know in my past, there have been times when I needed someone to step up for me, and they did, and they didn't have to, but I remember them with love, and I've gone out of my way to help curate their career to the extent they asked me to. And, lastly, for some of us who tend to be a bit obsessive, the hardest lesson to learn is to care enough about your work to want to do well, to want to solve problems, to want to deliver business value, to want to get rid of technical debt. But it's easy for some of us to care way too much. And I can't always stop myself from doing that. But at the end of the day, you have to take care of you, because if you stop taking care of you, you're not going to be able to deliver business value. I know it's a cold way to put it, but if you get burned to a crisp, you stop being useful to yourself or anyone else, and that's not good for anybody. So, we can do it together. Let's build culture in the micro, even if we can't get it in the macro. My name is Stuart. Thank you for your kind attention.